All right, so I think I have it ready to go. Here's chapter 7. This is voting in elections. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing here that I think is going to shock anybody. But we're going to try to get through this here pretty quick. We'll see how long it's going to take. Thanks for checking in today. Stopwatch going. There we go. All right, so chapter 7. So when we watch the news, you see like political politicians, people active in the political sphere, and then they just up and decide they're going to run for president or senate or whatever. And it seems like it's just kind of out of the blue. And I think one of the good things the book does to begin with is it starts talking about the fact that all of these decisions are planned out years and years in advance. It gives the example of Ted Cruz with the 2016 election when he really starts campaigning in early 2013 as soon as the 2012 election is over. And so, he goes, he takes a firm stance, easily definable stance, political stance against the Affordable Care Act. He goes out on a hunting trip in Iowa. He takes a family vacation in New Hampshire, and those are the two early political battlegrounds in each state. He makes his announcement to run for president at Liberty University, which is a conservative Christian university. And so, here you go. You have Ted Cruz that plans out all of these steps piece by piece by piece to create this image of exactly what he wants to look like while he's running for president. And while you're watching it on TV or the news is covering it, it might seem like this is just totally coincidental, but it is well planned and well paid for, and there's a lot of effort that goes into that. So with that in consideration, why? Well, you got to get people to vote for you, right? And so voting takes place on the state level. States regulate voting and voting regulations, and so each state has a different approach to how they allow people to register to vote, how voting takes place. And so you have voting laws in place to ensure that everyone does have a right to vote. Then you also have voting laws in place to ensure that the integrity of the elections. Now, depending on where you get your news, either the United States has really secure elections or they're just totally fraudulent. I would side with the fact that we have pretty secure elections and the fact that most people don't vote. There's a large percentage of people that choose not to vote versus going to vote twice. The ultimate goal of government is to increase the voting and participation, and oftentimes the goal of political parties is to limit voter turnout. We have a history of both parties trying to put in place limits to voter participation. So that's something to kind of wrap your head around, that the political party system is actually doing, is working against the goal of government. Obviously, in a democracy, you want everyone or as many people as possible to take part in the political process. However, if you're a political party, you only want your people, the people that are going to vote for you, to take part in that process. Excuse me, early in the morning here. It's cold outside too, huh? All right, the United States has a very long history of voter suppression. Obviously, from 1776 until 1877 and 1865. I take that back. Let's just go ahead. Well, until 1865, only white males can vote, and then after 1865, you have African American males can vote, and it's not until 1920 that women can vote, and it's not until the 1940s that a lot of times indigenous people are allowed to vote. So, like, we have a very long history of voter suppression. From 1865 to 1877, you have Reconstruction in the South, and we have high levels of African American turnout to vote. In 1877 to 1968, Reconstruction ended, and you see a period of voter suppression aimed at African Americans. things like poll tax, in which taxes are paid to vote at the state and national level. Literacy test, in which people have to prove that they can read and write and understand. You have a grandfather clause that's added to that literacy test to allow poor whites to avoid the literacy test. So maybe an illiterate poor white in the South couldn't read or write. They still wanted to go and vote, and probably vote Democrat at that time. And so the grandfather clause is added that if their grandfather was eligible to vote, then they should be able to vote without proving their literacy. Physical intimidation, hate groups, the Ku Klux Klan is a great example of this. The practice of whites only primaries in the South, in which since this was a state held election, the federal government couldn't really do anything about it, and the political parties of the South would only allow whites to vote on the primaries. And so therefore African Americans would have basically no say in the candidates that ran for representation. 1915, the Supreme Court ruled that the grandfather clause was unconstitutional. The 24th Amendment brought an end to the poll tax. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 saw the creation of government oversights into areas, especially areas of the South that have history of voter suppression or voting laws that are aimed at limiting voting participation by minorities. And so from 1965 really until recently, you've seen the increase in the power of the minority vote. You can see here the Voting Rights Act, the impact in 1965, 7%, a little under 7% of Mississippians that were African American were registered to vote. By 2 years later, 1967, 60% are registered to vote. Now, that's part of the Voting Rights Act. It's also part of the civil rights efforts of groups like the Black Panthers or SLIC and SNCC that we've talked about in the past, that go out and register people to vote. And so you see a huge increase. Alabama also, same time frame. Okay, crazy. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Alabama is roughly 20% in 1965 and up to 51% by 1967. Under the Voting Rights Act, you see ideas like online voter registration, the motor voter bills that became very popular in the late 80s, early 90s, and where you would go when you get your driver's license, you can register to vote at the DMV just by checking a box. And so those are pretty popular. You're starting to see some kickback on ideas like that due to security issues or costs to states. But again, most of these are going to be led by political parties that are looking to limit opposition groups from getting out to the polls. In Kansas, one of the bigger examples you can see is the Voter ID Act. Statistically, it's more likely that non-African Americans are going to have access to government issued IDs. And so therefore they would be eligible to vote. It's easier for a Caucasian or a European American to gain access to state issue IDs than African Americans for various socioeconomic and cultural reasons. And so therefore, these voter ID acts tend to eliminate minority voting or limit minority voting in a greater percentage than Caucasian voting. And when you have a political party like the Republicans that tend to be a party of Caucasian, a higher percentage of Caucasian members, that's a way to maintain power. Okay, 2013, we have a Supreme Court ruling in Shelby County versus Holder. That would have been Eric Holder, the Attorney General, in 2013. That ruled that federal oversight was no longer needed in the Voter Rights Act, and so it kind of takes away the teeth of the Voter Rights Act. And now all voting levels are made at the state and local levels. Since 2013, you've seen these new bills come into place, like again the ID voting, or limits on absentee voting, limits on mail-in voting in certain states, to try to limit, try to limit voter participation for political party reasons. The 2015, the book talks about the National Commission on Voting Rights. They show that states that have a harder or more difficult avenue to, what is that on my face? A more difficult avenue to register to vote, the lower the turnout. And so states with simpler laws see more voters. Examples would be like the state of Oregon. Is that coming up here pretty quick? The state of Oregon automatically registers people to vote. There's some kickback on that because it's starting to get into that idea that, you know, what if I don't want to register to vote? Is that an invasion of my privacy? It's one of my rights not to vote, right? Non-political participation is as much of an American right as voting and political participation. Most states have some type of a written application to vote. States have residency requirements. You have to live in the state typically 6 months, sometimes 3 months before you can vote. You have to take an oath that you don't have felonies. Some states don't allow felons to vote. Some states do. So again, it's a state level. Some states have same-day voter registration, that you can show up and register to vote and vote on the same day. In Kansas, I think it's about 6 weeks that you have to be registered to vote before you can vote in a general election. So a little bit different there. Some states require you to declare your political party to vote in a primary. In the state of Kansas, if you want to vote in the Republican primary, you have to register as a Republican. If you register as a Democrat or are not registered to a political party, then you are eligible to vote in the Democratic primary in the state. As far as political participation in the state of Kansas, it's very difficult to participate in any meaningful way if you're not registered as a Republican. Let's see, the Motor Voter Act, we kind of already talked about that. It does increase youth voter registration, but it doesn't necessarily bring out the strong youth vote. That can be tied to political candidates as much as anything. Barack Obama in 2008 brought out a huge youth vote for his campaign. You know, he tapped into ideas that excited the youth voting population. You know, the 2016 election of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump saw a huge downturn in youth voting. But you know, you got two people that are in their mid to late 70s that are running against each other. Again, with the Biden-Trump election in 2020, you didn't see a huge, the youth didn't necessarily see a huge turnout. It was bigger than in 2016. So you have that. So the problems with registering to vote, or multiple people being registered multiple times in states, kind of started to appear in 2020. Or, I'm sorry, 2000. The election of 2020. The election of 2000 between Al Gore and George W. Bush. The state of Florida became, you know, the state of Florida was won by George Bush by a total of like 750 votes. And in the investigation of the state and the voting of that state, it became apparent that there wasn't voter fraud. There wasn't evidence of Joe Smith voting in Dade County and then Orlando and then Jacksonville or whatever, voting multiple times in different places. But as people moved in Florida and they would re-register to vote in their new home, their old voter registration did not go away. And so there were situations where people were registered to vote maybe 6 or 7 times at 6 or 7 different locations in the state of Florida, which could lead to voter fraud if someone would be willing to try to swing the vote with 10 or 15 votes. Now, 10 or 15 votes typically would not be a meaningful total, but if you could turn that into 1,000 votes over the entire state of Florida, then you could have swung the whole presidential election of 2,000. Proponents, people in favor of acts like Oregon that automatically registers someone to vote, point out that because the state is so active in the voter registration and it's tied into your driving privileges, that it's very easy to track people because people typically will change their driver's license address and driver's license because it's required by the law. 2002, you start to see voting information updated voting machines, voting databases across states to make sure that if someone's registered to vote in Virginia, that they're not also registered to vote in Maryland, and those types of things make voting more accessible to handicapped individuals. Louisiana voters are placed on a no vote list if they move and they don't register to vote, and so then you have to go in and fill out paperwork to get re-registered to vote. The state of Oklahoma works with the health department to take dead people off of voter registers. One of the complaints or one of the unfounded complaints of the Republican Party is that Democrats tend to vote when they're dead. And I think that has been an issue in the past. I have not seen any evidence of it recently. Now, with early mail-in voting, I'm sure that you could find some examples of people entering, voting early and then dying before the general election. But as far as large numbers of people voting after they're no longer living, I haven't seen evidence of that recently. You have states working with each other. We kind of talked about that. And again, the biggest problem facing the country and the biggest problem facing the political process is not fraudulent voters, but the fact that people just don't get out and vote. You have a third of voters that either register as Republicans or Democrats, like 1/3 of the whole registers one way or the other. And then you have 2/3, you have another third that is kind of independent, and then you have another third that just doesn't vote. And so, you have 60% of people that could really make a difference in voting live. Let's see, all states require residency, 18 years of age, and for you to be a U.S. citizen to vote in national elections. Some states allow legal, and even some states allow illegal immigrants to vote in local elections, and that's at the state level. States get to regulate voting. Some states add more restrictions, like if you commit a felony, you lose your right to vote. Some states, like Vermont, actually allow people that are convicted of a felony and serving time in jail to vote. Kansas does not allow felons to vote. Voting turnout rises and falls with each election. Typically, the largest percentage of voters come out for the presidential elections, and those are because there's so much press and attention paid to those. However, the majority of people, their lives are affected much more by the off-term elections or even the elections in April of every year, where they vote for school board and county commissioner and local taxes and things like that. But most people don't go out and vote. Organizations like Rock the Vote aim at increasing the youth voter turnout, but they've had kind of limited results. When I was a kid, MTV used to be a big social component of the lives of American teenagers. and Rock the Vote was a big thing. Like voter participation was really encouraged. However, as teenagers are moving away from television and moving into social media or on-demand type things like YouTube and those types of things, these types of organizations are having to find new ways to contact children or young adults and young voters. People tend to vote most on issues that affect them. Your 2020 presidential election saw more voters come out than ever before. Part of that can be seen as an indictment on former President Trump. Some of it can be seen as people concerned about I don't know, the ideas of this woke culture, or the perception that America is moving further to the left, and they come out and they support a right-wing candidate like President Trump. So when people get motivated or they feel like they have a personal interest, they're more likely to vote. When you're looking at voter turnout, you can create a number, really anything you want. There's an old saying that there's the truth, there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. So your truth, lies, damn lies, and then the worst would be statistics, because you can make them say whatever you want. If you want to say, all right, the highest percentage of voter participation, well, you would take the number of people that actually voted and you would divide that number by registered voters, and you would probably find, like in 2012, you would see that 87% of registered voters came out and voted. So you have 87% voter turnout, and that would be awesome, right? But then you take that and you look back and you go, all right, well, only 42% of the population voted. Well, that's your total population. That's going to include people that aren't eligible to vote. So that's going to be people that are under 18, people that probably had recently moved, people that are in prison, XYZ, right? All right, so you can go from 87 to 42. Well, you want to make it a little bit better. You take out those kids that are under 18, and you take the people that actually voted and divide that by your voting age population. Okay, so everybody over 18 that voted makes up 57% of the voting age population. That's not bad, right? Well, again, you're going to have a certain percentage of those people that are in prison or ineligible to vote for various reasons. And so you could lower your base number there. So you would take the people who actually voted and divide it by what's referred to as your voting eligible population. And those are people that are over 18, not in prison, not dealing with severe mental health issues or mental deficiencies of some kind. And you have a 60% turnout there. So you can go from 80, you can go from 87% in one poll to 42 in another to 60%. It just kind of depends on how you want to manipulate those numbers. Campaigns focus on registered voters because they're people that are most likely to vote. So I'm a registered voter. I typically vote at least once a year, if not twice a year. I try to vote twice a year. And I get a lot of campaign people that stop by my house. It's funny that I get campaign people that stop by my house and knock on my door. Campaign action groups like Acorn, who are now defunct, they focus on that voting eligible population and try to get more people out to vote. Sometimes Acorn has been accused of trying to get people to vote fraudulently. They've also been accused of using unsightly methods to encourage people to vote or to bring out attention to different issues. Acorn would sometimes they would pay protesters. They weren't necessarily very organized, and so they try to present an instance where a protest would look organic, and it just wasn't. What are some factors that are going to determine if someone's going to vote or not? Age is a big one. If you're under 25, you're very less likely to vote than you are if you're 65 to 74. 18 to 25-year-olds typically, they care less about the government. They don't have a very tight connection. They're probably not involved in government programs that they can feel. A large percentage of 18 to 25-year-olds are going to be off to college. And so they're going to be away from home, and that means filling out applications for a absentee ballot or early voting, and that's paperwork and a little bit of commitment for 18-year-olds. 65 to 74-year-olds are typically recently retired. They're still relatively mobile. By at 74, they're driving. They're self-sufficient. Voting day gives them something to do. They go out, they get to socialize, go to McDonald's and get a cup of coffee or whatever. And when you're 65, you're eligible for Medicare, which is government health insurance. You're eligible for Social Security, so that's income. So now you have services that you're tied into. Again, you have free time to vote. And so the older community is probably more concerned about things like taxes, increase in taxes. They typically don't have younger children at the home anymore, and so they're not concerned about school taxes, and they don't want to pay extra money if it's not going to benefit them directly. Then where are we at? Okay. Talked about rock the vote a couple times. We've seen an increase in youth voting, but not a huge increase. Income typically, the more money you make, the more likely you are to vote. And I think that's going to tie into taxes and also just a free time. If you make over $100,000 a year, you're going to be more likely to vote than someone that makes less than $20,000 a year. I would say that if you make less than $20,000 a year, as a family, you're probably going to be tied into some government programs, but maybe you don't have the free time or the ability to get out and vote. If you make $100,000 a year, you're typically going to have more of a white collar job, possibly, or be a business owner, and have the opportunity to sneak away and vote. African Americans and whites typically vote roughly around the same percent, about 60 some odd percent. Hispanics and Asian Americans show up to vote about half of that percentage, about half of that time. Some politicians can tie into voting groups, and they can swing elections one way or the other. We talked about Obama energizing the youth vote in 2008. President Trump in 2016 united this idea of white, non-college educated workers to turn out and vote, and they voted for him in record numbers. Biden won the college-educated white middle-class vote. Typically, though, the biggest percentage for Biden was college-educated women. Kind of swung that election to his favor. Biden also received a huge percentage of the African American vote. Here we go. Boom. Women typically vote at a much higher rate than men after 1920, obviously, right? So, like, if and you can kind of figure that out. Like, if you're going to go through problems to get the right to vote, then you're probably going to exercise it more likely. I always encourage women in my classes to go out and vote, because so many people worked for that right, for you to have that right, and you owe it to the people that came before you that worked so diligently to get you that right to go out and exercise it. However, while women vote in a higher percentage rates than men, there has not been a candidate that has really shown to consolidate the women vote. I think one of the things that's interesting about that is you have like Hillary Clinton, who was your first first major party female candidate for president. Didn't really do all that great with women voters, and there's probably all kinds of different reasons for that. But so women typically won't vote for other women, or women don't vote for other women just because they're women. So there's not a quote unquote woman's vote. The low voter turnout happens for lots of different reasons. You have obstacles to voting. We've talked about those throughout, like the voter ID laws. That's a huge one. Registering to vote in advance of elections, those types of things. Just people aren't very organized and planned. Media is one reason that people either turn out to vote or don't turn out to vote. The book talks about the weird situation in 2016 in which the Access Hollywood story came out shortly before the general election, where Donald Trump says horrible things about his interactions with women. And then that's kind of also offset by 11 days before the election, the FBI reopened the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails. And so you have a little bit of give and take there. So, some people are going to overlook one area for the other. Some people are going to overlook, either way, and whatever. Sometimes low voter turnout could just be apathy, like who cares? If you're more of a liberal or a Democrat in the state of Kansas, hey, my guy's not going to win, so what's the point? Voter fatigue, just tired of voting, or being told that you have to pay attention to certain issues, and you just get tired of it. I think the election of Donald Trump in 2016 is one of those situations where people were told that they're supposed to act and believe a certain thing, and then you have a candidate that comes out that's like, no, you don't have to do that, and people swing to that direction. How much do we have? Oh, we still have a lot to go. Okay. Elections, all elections have requirements to run. You have to get a certain number of signatures and pay fees and meet age restrictions. Most elections across the country, we live in the state of Kansas, and Republicans run the state of Kansas for the most part. The state's relatively evenly split between Republicans and Democrats. So for most elections, you're going to have members of both parties. There you go. Candidates tend to begin on the local level. Men begin their political careers much earlier than women. And so that's one of the reasons that you can see so many more men at the higher levels of politics than women, because it does take some time to go through the ranks and get up there. Women tend to join politics after their families have grown. Incumbents in elections are more likely to win. Incumbents are people that are in office now and then running for re-election. 95% of the House wins re-election as incumbents, and 82% of senators will. The more money you can raise, the better your odds of winning, especially the more money you can raise early. Book does a nice job of talking about that. Political action committees, or PACs or super PACs, are relatively new. These are ways for candidates to raise money, raise more money outside of their campaign, and use that money to focus on issues that they believe are important to voters, but they don't necessarily have to tie their name to it. So famous court case of Citizens United against the Federal Election Commission removed all spending limits on corporations. So corporations can flood the elections with money and use that as free speech to support or oppose a candidate if they feel fit. Individuals can give like $2,700 to a candidate, which is relatively small. You can give it per election though, so you could give what, $5,000, $5,400, somewhere in that range. You can give up to $5,000 to a political action committee. It should be 5,000, not 500. And then you can give $34,000 to $33,400 to a national political party for them to divvy out that money. Constitution lays out some ways of how like the president's elected and the vice president's elected, but doesn't say how they're nominated. That's typically handled with political parties. Most political parties now do their own primaries. You have two different types of you have a number of different primaries. You have like closed primaries in which only members of the political party may vote. So in Kansas, if you're a Republican, you can vote in the Republican closed primary. You have an open primary where all voters can vote. It doesn't matter what party you're registered with. You can vote in the primary, and then you have situations where you can have a top two primary, and these are typically like city commission positions or things where you're going to have lots of different people running, and the top two candidates would get out of the primaries and run for elections. Other than primaries, you have the idea of a caucus, and the caucus is where everybody gets together, like at a school or a hotel or a large meeting venue, and you decide who you're going to cast your support for, and you do that by gatherings. And so people that want to vote for, I don't know, Joe Biden in the 2024 presidential election or presidential primaries in Iowa will meet. Democrats will meet at a certain location. Everybody there will go to a corner of a room that wants to vote for Biden, and then everybody that wants to vote for Mayor Pete Buttigieg would go to another corner, and then you try to recruit those people over to your side through debate or whatever. And so it's more of an open discussion of ideas than a primary. Iowa's the most famous of those. Once primaries are held and candidates are selected, you have a national convention, especially for presidential elections. These typically last about a week. People come out and make a lot of speeches. They're covered by all the networks. In modern politics, these conventions are kind of just a formality. Most of the heavy lifting's been done before the conventions. Before that, but I mean, like even in the 1920s, 1912 is a great example. Woodrow Wilson is like it takes 46 ballots for the Democrats to settle on a candidate, and so you could have a situation in open voting where people that weren't even really part of the election process or part of the primary runoff end up winning the party nomination due to support and compromise and those types of things. Conventions are where political parties develop their platform. You'll sometimes, if you pay attention to the news or talk show radio, you'll hear individuals talk about party platforms and beliefs. And these are just what the party stands for, where they are on certain key issues. All those key issues, again, are researched and developed to ensure more people vote for them. On election days, voters select candidates. As far as the presidential election, they're actually selecting members of an electoral college that will meet later at the state house in December and cast their vote for who they were told to vote for. Those are faithful electors. Faithless electors are someone that votes for someone other than the election winners, and those pop up from time to time. Each state has the same number of electoral votes as seats in Congress. So the smallest you would have is 3 places like Montana. Other than that, California has the largest number of electoral votes with 55. Most states are a winner-take-all type situation where if you win the popular vote in the state, then you get all of the electoral votes. Maine and Nebraska, they run something called the district system, in which the winner of the states gets the state's 2 electoral college votes, and then the winner of each individual congressional district gets those. Midterm elections happen every 2 years. You have off-cycle elections that happen every year in between the midterm and the presidential election, or the presidential election and the midterm. Often the parties and powers will lose seats. So right now, the Democrats have a very slim majority in the House, and they have a 50-50 split in the Senate. It's expected that Republicans are going to take control of both the House and the Senate in the 2022 elections in November. Just because that's how politics works. The people in party power typically lose power. Already talked about raising money. Very wealthy candidates that can spend their own money have a huge advantage because they don't have to answer to people. Name recognition is hugely important. If you're nobody from nowhere, it's hard to get elected on a national stage, regardless of what your ideas are. Sometimes you'll have shadow campaigns that are run by super PACs or whatever that will attack every single issue of their opposition. Examples of that might be like Swift Boat Veterans for Truth that attacked John Kerry's military record in 2004. The ironic part about that is, here you have these people attacking John Kerry that went over and served his country in Vietnam, but then they're supporting someone that avoided the conflict through family connections and the National Guard. Technology is changing the way that we see candidates. The 1960s, the first presidential debate. Kennedy and Nixon debate each other on national television. People that listen to the debate on radio think Nixon won by a big margin. People that watch it on TV believe that Kennedy won. And it's basically Kennedy had spent the week preparing for the debate in California, out in the sun, has a nice tan, gets all makeuped up. He looks really good. Nixon, looking like me today, he's all blotchy. The light's not reflected on him in the eyes, and people don't trust him. And so image and the way that you appear in front of a television camera becomes very important to politics. I would argue that since 1960, the better looking candidate has always won the presidential election. And you can go look those up if you want to. I do think that when you close your eyes and you picture, recently you close your eyes and you picture Joe Biden before he's president, he's smiling, he's a friendly old man. President Trump, when he was president, was kind of grumpy and gruff, and he didn't look very happy. People tend to swing that way. Trump was always a little bit more tanned and much happier looking when he ran against Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama was much more attractive than Mitt Romney or John McCain. George H.W. Bush is probably better looking than Kerry or John Kerry or Al Gore. Bill Clinton. When he was president, he was much younger, much better looking. Ronald Reagan was a former movie actor, right? So you have those ideas. Late night television became very important to people because or your ability to go on and be personal on talk shows. That's still important because those talk shows get cut up and fed back out into social media. Now social media is becoming the great influencer of political elections, and how you look in 30 and 10 to 15 to 30-second sound bites are going to be important moving forward. There's just some definitions there. Straight line ticket means you vote for one political party in an election. Incumbency advantage means like if you're running and you're already in office, you have an advantage. Gerrymandering is how you redraw districts. If you follow the news in Kansas, we had redistricting. And that first district of Kansas is very funny shape now, trying to limit the progressive power, the voting power of Democrats in the East, trying to offset the power of Democrats in Lawrence and Douglas County with that of the conservative views of the Western Kansas. And so we'll see how that goes. Direct democracy is a democracy where citizens vote on every aspect of government. The United States is not a direct democracy. We are a representative democracy in which we elect people to act on our behalfs. You have ideas like the referendum and initiative that do exist in the United States, in which citizens can be asked to vote on laws written by the government in referendum. These are typically controversial laws in which politicians don't want to be on the record as voting for or against them. And initiative is a situation where an individual can write a law, get enough signatures to get on the ballot, and allow people to vote for it. And that brings us to an end. So hopefully that was helpful. Quiz is up, test is up for this unit, and we'll see you guys in a little bit with Chapter 8. Thanks.